The first time Declan left me at the altar for my sister, I drove my car into a concrete barrier at 80 miles an hour. The second time, thanks to some cosmic glitch that woke me up 3 months before the wedding, I helped him pick out his tuxedo. I woke up with the taste of pennies in my mouth and the sound of tearing metal vibrating in my teeth. My hands flew to my chest, expecting to find the steering column crushing my ribs. There was only the soft, heavy weight of a down comforter. I was drenched in sweat. The air smelled like expensive lavender detergent and Declan's musky cologne. I sat up. The bedroom was quiet. The digital clock on the nightstand read 7 a.m. October 14th. I stared at the red numbers until they blurred. October 14th. My wedding was scheduled for January 12th. I knew this because, in a life that felt like it had ended 5 minutes ago, January 12th was the day Declan stood in front of 200 guests, looked at me in my white dress and said he couldn't do it. He said he loved Chloe, my youngest sister. I remember the murmurs. I remember my father looking away. I remember running out into the freezing sleet, starting my car, and burying the accelerator into the floorboard until the road curved, and I didn't. I threw off the covers and walked to the bathroom mirror. No scars, no blood. Just the pale, exhausted face of a 26-year-old woman who had spent the last 4 years building a logistics company from the ground up, only to put it all in her fiancé's name, because he had the business degree. The bedroom door clicked open. Declan walked in, wearing his running gear. He looked young, untouched by the guilt he'd wear later. "You're up early," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead with the collar of his shirt. He didn't come over to kiss me. He hadn't for a month. In my first life, I thought he was just stressed about the wedding. Now I knew he had spent the last 3 nights at my father's house, sneaking into Chloe's room while I was finalizing our catering budget. "Yeah," I said. My voice sounded rusty. "Couldn't sleep." "Listen, Nora." He leaned against the doorframe, the classic Declan pose, casual, dominant, slightly inconvenienced. "We need to talk tonight. After work, your dad and Chloe are coming over for dinner. There's something we need to get on the table." The first time around, this was the dinner where they dropped the bomb. They didn't confess the affair. Not yet. Instead, Chloe had cried, saying she felt distant from me, and Declan had suggested we postpone the wedding because the family dynamics weren't right. I had spent the next 3 months bending over backward, trying to fix a dynamic that was already dead, desperate to keep the man I loved. I looked at him, really looked at him, the slight weakness in his chin, the way his eyes shifted away from mine when he lied. He wasn't a prize, he was a parasite. "Sure," I said, turning back to the mirror and grabbing my toothbrush. "Dinner sounds great. Pick up some wine." He blinked, clearly thrown by my lack of anxiety. Usually, the phrase, "we need to talk," sent me into a spiral of people-pleasing. Yeah. Red?" "Get the Cabernet. Chloe likes it." He swallowed hard and walked away. The day was a blur of calculated movements. I didn't go to the office. I went to a quiet coffee shop in the financial district, opened my laptop, and pulled up the corporate structure of Apex Logistics. Apex was my baby. I coded the routing algorithm that made our delivery times 20% faster than the competition. But Declan was the CEO. My father was the primary investor. I was just the COO, drawing a modest salary. In my previous life, when Declan left me, my father fired me to keep the peace and handed my algorithm over to a tech conglomerate for a massive buyout, leaving me with nothing. Not this time. I opened the original employment and intellectual property contracts I had drafted 3 years ago. I scrolled to section 4, paragraph B, the architect clause, a tiny loophole I had included out of paranoia, which stated that if the COO resigned without cause, the exclusive licensing rights to the proprietary algorithm reverted to the creator unless a buyout of $5 million was executed within 30 days. Declan never read the contracts. He just signed them. He hated paperwork. I drafted my resignation letter. Then, I drafted a transfer of the software license to a newly formed LLC in my name. I hit print. That evening, the apartment smelled of roast chicken. I ordered takeout and plated it on our good china. When the doorbell rang, I opened it to find my father and Chloe. Chloe looked beautiful. She always did. She wore a fitted cashmere sweater that clung to her chest, her blonde hair falling in perfect waves. She looked at me with that signature mix of pity and condescension. "Nora," she sighed, pulling me into a hug that felt like being wrapped in a cold, wet towel. "You look tired." "Working hard," I said flatly. My father patted my shoulder. "Good girl. Keep the engine running. Declan tells me quarterly projections are up." "They are," I said. Dinner was agonizingly tense. Declan pushed his food around his plate. Chloe kept shooting him nervous, meaningful glances. I chewed my chicken, drank my wine, and waited. Finally, Declan dropped his fork. It clattered against the plate. "Nora, we need to talk about the wedding. Here it comes. Chloe and I." He stumbled, looking at my sister for support. She reached under the table. I knew they were holding hands. "We've been spending a lot of time together lately, working on the wedding surprises, and we realized something." My father sat perfectly still, his eyes darting between the three of us. "I don't think we should get married, Nora," Declan blurted out. "I'm sorry. I have feelings for Chloe, and she has feelings for me." Silence descended on the dining room, heavy and thick. In my first life, I screamed. I threw my wine glass at the wall. I fell to my knees and begged my father to say something, to defend me. My father had simply sighed and said, "The heart wants what it wants, Nora. Don't make this uglier than it has to be." This time, I picked up my napkin, dabbed the corner of my mouth, and placed it neatly on the table. "I see," I said. Declan stared at me. Chloe's mouth fell open slightly. "You see?" Declan echoed. "Yes. You have feelings for each other. That makes sense." I took a sip of water. "It certainly explains the dry cleaning bills for the hotel downtown." Chloe flushed a deep, violent crimson. "Nora, I didn't want to hurt you," she started, her voice trembling, playing the victim exactly on cue. "We tried to stop it. It's just a soulmate connection. You wouldn't understand." "I'm sure I wouldn't," I said calmly. I stood up and began clearing the plates. "What are you doing?" my father demanded, finally finding his voice. "Your fiancé just said he's leaving you for your sister." "I heard him, Dad. What do you want me to do? Force him to the altar at gunpoint?" I scraped the leftover chicken into the trash bin. "The wedding is cancelled. Or, I suppose, transferred. You can keep the venue, Chloe. January is a lovely time for a winter wonderland theme." Declan stood up, his face twisted in confusion and anger. He wanted a fight. He needed me to be hysterical so he could feel justified in leaving the crazy woman for the sweet sister. My indifference was suffocating him. "Are you out of your mind?" Declan snapped. "We're tearing your life apart and you're doing the dishes." I turned on the faucet, letting the warm water run over my hands. I looked over my shoulder, meeting his eyes with a dead, flat stare. "My life is just fine, Declan. You can have each other. Just make sure you get your things out of the guest room by tomorrow. I have a lot of packing to do." The easiest way to destroy a man's ego is to show him exactly how little his absence affects your day-to-day routine. By Friday, I had moved into a corporate apartment downtown. It was sterile, quiet, and perfect. I left the engagement ring on the kitchen counter of our shared apartment, right next to the utility bills. I didn't leave a note. The fallout within my family was exactly as toxic as I remembered, only this time I wasn't standing in the blast radius. My phone blew up with texts from extended relatives. My father called me 3 times to smooth things over, which in his vocabulary meant convincing me to attend Sunday dinners so the family image wouldn't look fractured. I declined. I had actual work to do. On Monday morning, I walked into the Apex Logistics office. The air buzzed with ringing phones and the low hum of server towers. I bypassed my office and walked straight to the executive boardroom where Declan was holding a Monday morning stand-up with the department heads. He stopped mid-sentence when I opened the door. He looked exhausted. Dark circles hung under his eyes. Chloe, it turned out, was a high-maintenance partner when she wasn't sneaking around. "Nora," he said, straightening his tie. We didn't expect you in today, given the circumstances. Just dropping off some paperwork, I said, keeping my voice light and professional. I walked over and placed 2 manila folders in front of him. The first is my formal resignation as COO, effective immediately. The second is the notification of license reversion for the routing algorithm per Section 4 of my contract. The room went completely silent. The head of sales, a sharp guy named Marcus, suddenly looked very interested in his shoelaces. Declan let out a harsh, patronizing laugh. Nora, come on, this is petty. You're angry, I get it, but you can't just quit. And you certainly can't take the software. Apex owns it. Read the contract, Declan, I said, tapping the folder. You have 30 days to buy out the license for $5 million in cash. Otherwise, the IP transfers to my holding company. I've already disabled your administrative access to the back end. You can run the current version, but there will be no updates, no bug fixes, and no server support. His smug smile vanished. He flipped open the folder and began scanning the dense legal text. I watched his eyes track back and forth, waiting for the exact moment he realized he was legally boxed in. It took about 40 seconds. You wrote this in 3 years ago, he whispered, looking up at me. His face was pale. You were planning this? No, I was protecting myself. Good luck with the Q4 projections, Declan. I walked out of the room, leaving the door wide open. Over the next 2 months, I watched from a comfortable distance as Declan and Chloe's relationship buckled under the weight of reality. The wedding planning continued, fueled entirely by my father's checkbook and Chloe's desperate need to prove to everyone that she had won a prize. They kept the January 12th date. They kept the venue. They even kept the florist I had chosen. It was grotesque, like watching someone walk around in your skin. But behind the scenes, Apex Logistics was bleeding out. Without me maintaining the algorithm, routing errors began piling up. Trucks were delayed. Major clients threatened to pull their contracts. Declan was frantically trying to secure a loan to pay my $5 million buyout. But because all of Apex's assets were tied up in operational overhead, the banks were laughing him out of the room. He tried to call me. I let it go to voicemail. He showed up at my new apartment building one rainy Tuesday night in December. The concierge called up, saying a Mr. Hayes was demanding to see me. I told them to let him up. I was curious. When I opened my door, Declan looked like a drowning man. His expensive suit was soaked. He smelled like stale scotch and desperation. You have to stop this, he said, pushing past me into the apartment. He looked around at the minimalist furniture, the expensive art on the walls. I had cashed out my equity in a previous startup to afford this place. He hadn't known about that money. Stop what? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. The buyout, the sabotage. You're killing the company, Nora. He spun around, pointing a finger at me. Your dad is furious. He's threatening to pull his backing if I don't fix the supply chain issues. You have to turn the admin rights back over. I'm not sabotaging anything, I said smoothly. I simply resigned. You're the CEO. Fix it. I can't, he shouted, the facade finally breaking. I don't know how the code works. You know I don't. I stared at him. This was the man I had once thought hung the moon. The man I had died over. Now, he just looked pathetic, a hollow suit propped up by my labor and my father's money. You're getting married in 3 weeks, Declan, I said, walking over to the kitchen island and pouring myself a glass of water. You have a beautiful bride, a supportive father-in-law. You have everything you said you wanted. Why are you in my apartment whining about code? He stalked over, slamming his hands down on the marble countertop. Because if the company goes under, I have nothing. Chloe. Chloe wants a lifestyle I can't provide if Apex files for bankruptcy. The wedding alone is putting me in the red. Ah, there it was. My sister's legendary spending habits. In my previous life, I had subsidized them. I paid for the dinners, the vacations, the designer bags. Declan was finding out the hard way that Chloe was a luxury item he couldn't afford on a failing company's dime. That sounds like a personal problem, I said. Please, Nora. His voice broke. He reached out and tried to grab my hand. I pulled it back immediately. I made a mistake. Chloe is She's a nightmare. She doesn't care about the business. She doesn't care about the stress I'm under. She just cares about the flowers and the Instagram photos. I miss you. We were a team. I looked at his outstretched hand. I felt nothing. No anger, no vindication, no pity. Just a cold, clinical observation of a parasite trying to find a new host. Your 30-day window for the buyout expired yesterday, Declan, I said softly. He froze. I sold the exclusive licensing rights to Global Freight Solutions this morning, I continued. They're rolling out the software to their national fleet by the end of the month. Apex is officially obsolete. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. Get out of my apartment, I said, and don't ever come back. He walked out slowly, his shoulders slumped, looking exactly like a man walking to his own execution. The week of the wedding arrived with a bitter, biting frost. The city was encased in grey ice. I received an invitation in the mail. Thick cream cardstock, embossed with gold lettering. Mr. Richard Hughes requests the honour of your presence at the marriage of his daughter, Chloe Hughes, to Declan Hayes. It was a power move by my father, an expectation that I would show up, sit in the pews, and play the supportive sister to maintain the family's flawless social facade. I RSVP'd yes. I had a very specific reason for attending, and it wasn't for closure. 3 days before the wedding, I sat in the plush leather office of Ben, my corporate attorney. Ben was 50, balding, and possessed a deeply cynical view of human nature that I found incredibly comforting. The traps are set, Ben said, sliding a thick stack of manila folders across his desk. Are you absolutely sure you want to pull the trigger on this timing? It's aggressive. I'm sure, I said, signing the top document without hesitation. Here was the reality of Apex Logistics that Declan didn't understand. When we started the company, I took out 3 massive business loans to fund the initial infrastructure. Because I had the good credit and the collateral, I was the sole personal guarantor on those loans. Declan's name was nowhere near the debt. He only held the equity. In my first life, I had quietly managed the debt, making the massive monthly payments out of my own salary to keep the company afloat while Declan played CEO. When he married Chloe, they inherited a clean, debt-free company because I had bled myself dry to fix it. This time, I hadn't made a single payment since October. The loans were now in default. The grace period ended exactly on January 11th. The creditors have officially initiated the acceleration clause, Ben confirmed, tapping a pen against his chin. The full balance of $8.2 million is due immediately, since you formally resigned and transferred your equity back to the company pool as part of your severance restructuring. The debt burden falls entirely on the current primary shareholders, which are Declan and my father, I said, smiling for the first time in weeks. Correct. Warrants for asset seizure have been signed by the judge. The bank is moving fast. They don't want to risk the assets being hidden. The repossession teams are scheduled to hit the Apex warehouses tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Tomorrow morning, the day of the wedding. Perfect, I said. That evening was the rehearsal dinner. It was held at a pretentious country club in the suburbs, the kind of place that smelled of old money and cigar smoke. I wore a simple black dress, slipped into the back of the private dining room, and sat at a corner table. I watched the spectacle unfold. Chloe was holding court, wearing a white silk slip dress, drinking champagne, and laughing loudly at jokes she didn't understand. Declan sat beside her, looking physically ill. His skin was grey. He kept checking his phone under the table, likely fielding panicked emails from his accounting department as the financial walls began to close in. My father stood up to give a toast. He clinked his glass with a fork. "Family and friends," my father boomed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Tomorrow, my beautiful daughter Chloe marries the man of her dreams. Declan is a brilliant young man, a captain of industry, and the perfect addition to our family." I took a slow sip of my club soda. "They say that true love always finds a way," my father continued, his eyes briefly sweeping over my table before darting away. "And watching these two, I know that's true. To Chloe and Declan. To Chloe and Declan!" The room echoed. I clapped twice, silently. After dinner, people began filtering out into the lobby to get their coats. I walked down a quiet, carpeted hallway toward the restrooms. I heard footsteps behind me, heavy and fast. Nora! I stopped and turned. Declan was standing there, blocking the hallway. He looked completely unhinged. The charm was gone. The arrogance was gone. He was just a terrified animal backed into a corner. You came, he breathed, stepping closer. You actually came. It's a family event, I said evenly. I'm supporting my sister. Cut the bullshit, he hissed, looking around frantically. Why are you here? You've been dodging my calls for a month. Apex is bleeding. Your dad had to inject $2 million just to make payroll last week. I am dying here, Nora. You look terrible, I noted objectively. I don't want to do this, he blurted out, tears welling in his eyes. He reached out and grabbed my shoulders. His grip was too tight. I don't want to marry her. She's suffocating me. She threw a fit today because I asked her to downgrade the floral arrangements. She doesn't understand that the money is gone. I miss you. Please, tell me it's not too late. Tell me you still love me. I looked at his hands on my shoulders. Then I looked up into his desperate, pleading eyes. In my first life, I would have killed for this moment. I would have traded my soul to have him beg me to take him back. I would have forgiven him instantly, blinded by the twisted relief that I was the one he truly wanted. Now, it just felt pathetic. Take your hands off me, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was absolute zero. He flinched, dropping his hands. You made your bed, Declan, I said, stepping past him. Tomorrow, you get to lie in it. I walked down the hallway, leaving him standing alone in the shadows. When I got home to my apartment, I set my alarm for 7 a.m. I wanted to have plenty of time to get ready. After all, a wedding is a major event, and I didn't want to miss a single second of the collapse. The alarm blared at exactly 7 a.m. I reached over, tapped the screen, and let the silence wash back over the room. I didn't rush. I made a pot of dark roast coffee. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my apartment, wrapping both hands around the hot ceramic mug, and watched the city wake up beneath a fresh layer of grey snow. At 8:05 a.m., my phone vibrated on the kitchen island. A single text from Ben. Padlocks are on the gates. Fleet is grounded. Bank reps are on site. It's done. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It tasted like victory, bitter, rich, and piping hot. I spent 2 hours getting ready. I chose an emerald green silk dress. It was striking, sharp, and carried no hint of mourning. I paired it with a tailored black wool coat and leather gloves. I looked like a woman going to close a multi-million-dollar acquisition, not a jilted ex-fiancée attending her sister's wedding. The cathedral was a massive, vaulted stone structure downtown, chosen by Chloe for its dramatic center aisle and stained glass windows. I arrived 30 minutes early. The air inside was freezing, smelling heavily of beeswax candles and white lilies, funeral flowers. I bypassed the ushers offering programs and slipped into a pew in the very back row, entirely hidden by a large marble pillar. I didn't want to be seen. I wanted to observe. By 1:45 p.m., the pews were packed. The guest list was a who's who of my father's business associates, investors, and country club friends. Men in bespoke suits and women in heavy winter furs filed in, murmuring in hushed, polite tones. At 1:50 p.m., a subtle shift occurred in the atmosphere. It started 3 rows ahead of me. A man checked his phone, his brow furrowed. He nudged the woman next to him and tilted the screen. She gasped, covering her mouth with a gloved hand. Then, he tapped the shoulder of the man in front of him. Like a virus jumping from host to host, the news spread. Phones were pulled from breast pockets and designer clutches. Screens glowed in the dim light of the cathedral. Whispers hissed through the cavernous space. Bankrupt. Raided this morning. Assets seized. These were financial people. They had alerts set for major industry shifts. The collapse of Apex Logistics, a company many of them had tangential stakes in through my father, was breaking news on every local financial ticker. The organ music swelled, a booming, triumphant chord that drowned out the whispers. The congregation stood. The groomsmen filed out from the side door, taking their places at the altar. Declan emerged last. He looked like a corpse propped up by a tuxedo. His skin had a sickly yellow undertone. Sweat gleamed on his forehead under the harsh altar lights. His eyes were wide, darting frantically over the crowd. He knew. I could tell by the way his hands shook as he clasped them in front of his waist. He had seen his phone before walking out. He knew the warehouses were locked. He knew he was standing in front of 200 people with a net worth of 0. Then came Chloe. She walked down the aisle on my father's arm. She looked radiant, wrapped in thousands of dollars of white lace and tulle, a diamond tiara glittering in her hair. She was smiling, soaking in the attention, entirely oblivious to the fact that the men she was walking past were currently recalculating my father's financial ruin. My father looked proud. His chest was puffed out. He patted Chloe's hand. He hadn't checked his phone. He was too busy playing the patriarch to realize the empire he thought he bought into was currently being auctioned off for parts. They reached the altar. My father kissed Chloe's cheek, placed her hand in Declan's, and took his seat in the front row. Declan stared at Chloe. He looked at her custom dress. He looked at the massive diamond on her finger, a ring paid for by the company credit card, which was currently declining. The priest stepped up to the microphone. "Dearly beloved," his voice echoed, deep and resonant. "We are gathered here today in the sight of God and in the presence of this company to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony." I leaned back against the hard wooden pew. This was the moment. In my first life, I had sat in the front row, crying silently into my bouquet as Declan stared at me, apologized, and broke my heart. Today, I didn't feel a thing. I just watched the house of cards catch fire. The ceremony dragged on. The priest spoke about commitment, about weathering storms, about the foundation of trust. Every word seemed to physically strike Declan. He kept shifting his weight, his expensive leather shoes scraping harshly against the stone steps. He tugged at his collar like it was a noose cutting off his oxygen. Sweat beaded on his upper lip, catching the light from the massive stained glass window above them. Chloe stood perfectly still beside him. She wasn't looking at his face. She was angling her jaw, posing for the photographer stationed discreetly in the corner. She looked irritated by Declan's fidgeting, her lips pressed into a tight, thin line that ruined her practiced beaming smile. She wanted a perfect wedding album. She was entirely oblivious to the fact that the men she had just walked past were currently recalculating her father's financial ruin. "Declan," the priest said, his deep, resonant voice echoing through the nave. He turned the heavy, leather-bound book toward the groom. "Do you take Chloe to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" The cathedral fell dead silent. You could hear the low, vibrating hum of the floor heaters. Declan opened his mouth. A dry, clicking sound came out, but no words. He looked at Chloe. She offered him a stiff smile, her eyes wide and demanding. "Say the line," her expression screamed. He looked past her white veil, down into the front row, locking eyes with my father. My father was frowning now. He checked his gold Rolex. He glanced around the room, finally noticing the heavy, suffocating tension rolling off the guests. The pitying stares from the bankers in the third row. The frantic whispering from his golf partners. "Declan!" the priest prompted. He stepped closer, lowering his voice, though the microphone picked it up anyway. "Are you all right, son? Do you need a moment?" Declan dropped Chloe's hands as if her skin had burned him. He took a full, unsteady step backward. Declan choked. He brought a trembling hand to his face, wiping the sweat from his eyes, smearing a bit of the concealer Chloe had undoubtedly made him wear for the photos. "I can't." Chloe's aesthetic shattered. The elegance vanished, replaced instantly by sharp, panicked confusion. "Declan, what are you doing? Stop joking. People are looking at us." "I can't do it," Declan said, his voice rising, cracking under the unbearable strain. He looked directly at my father, ignoring his bride completely. "The bank took it, William. They took everything this morning. The trucks, the servers. The accounts are completely frozen. A collective gasp swept through the church. The whispering exploded into open, chaotic murmuring. A woman 2 rows ahead of me actually dropped her program. My father stood up. His heavy oak chair scraped violently against the stone floor, a sound like a gunshot in the cavernous space. "What the hell are you talking about, Declan? What bank? We are in the middle of a mass. The corporate loans!" Declan shouted. Tears finally spilled over his eyelashes, cutting clean tracks through the sweat on his cheeks. He was unraveling right there on the altar steps, regressing from a CEO into a terrified little boy. They defaulted. The grace period ended yesterday. The repossession teams hit the warehouses at 8 o'clock. We're bankrupt. Chloe's face drained of all colour, leaving her makeup looking garish and painted on. She looked from Declan to our father, her mouth hanging open. The romantic illusion was dead. The reality of the transaction had just been exposed under bright lights. "Bankrupt!" Chloe shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly into the vaulted ceiling, completely devoid of any bridal grace. She didn't ask if he was okay. She didn't ask how they would fix the business or pay their employees. She zeroed in on the only thing that mattered to her. "What do you mean bankrupt? The venue hasn't been fully paid off. What about the house? What about the 3 weeks in Maldives?" "It's gone, Chloe!" Declan yelled back, his voice raw. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders heaving. "All of it is gone. Your dad's $2 million cash injection from last week, seized by the creditors to cover the interest penalties. We have nothing. I have nothing." My father stumbled back a step. He clutched the edge of the wooden pew, his knuckles turning white. The blood drained from his face. $2 million. Gone in a single morning. The social standing he had prized above his own eldest daughter, publicly incinerated in front of his entire country club circle. He looked out at the sea of guests, seeing the judgment and the predatory calculations in their eyes. He was no longer the apex predator in the room. He was the carcass. "You!" My father pointed a trembling, manicured finger at Declan. His voice was a dangerous, low hiss. "You told me the algorithm glitch was a temporary setback. You told me the supply chain was secure. You showed me the projections." "I lied!" Declan sobbed, his legs finally giving out. He dropped to his knees on the velvet altar steps, the picture of absolute, pathetic defeat. "I didn't know how to run it without Nora. She built the whole thing. I just signed the papers. I don't know what I'm doing." Chloe stared down at the man weeping on the floor, the soulmate she had stolen, the prize she had won. He was broken, hyperventilating, and completely broke. She looked at her massive diamond ring. She knew instantly it would have to go back to the jeweler. She turned in disgust. She kicked the long, expensive train of her dress out of the way, treating the custom silk like trash. "I'm not marrying a failure," she spat, her voice cold and dripping with venom. Without looking back at the man on his knees, she stormed down the side aisle. Her heels clicked aggressively against the stone, a rapid, furious rhythm. She pushed past the stunned groomsmen, shoved open the heavy wooden sacristy door, and disappeared. My father remained frozen, staring blankly at the empty space where his daughter had just been standing, his chest heaving as the absolute finality of his financial ruin settled into his bones. The guests were standing up now. They weren't waiting for a dismissal. Coats were being pulled on, phones were already pressed to ears, eager to escape the disaster zone and short their relevant stocks. It was complete, utter destruction. A nuclear bomb set off in a sanctuary. I sat in the back row for a moment longer, perfectly hidden behind the marble pillar. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just took a deep, steadying breath. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried since that morning in October. The raw betrayal. The burning anger. The agonizing feeling of being discarded for someone else. Finally dissolved. It lifted off my chest and evaporated into the cold church air, leaving behind nothing but quiet clarity. They had destroyed themselves. I hadn't pushed them. I had simply stopped holding up the walls that kept their delusions intact. I stood up, smoothed the skirt of my emerald dress, and pulled on my leather gloves, fitting the fabric carefully over my fingers. I turned and walked out the heavy oak doors at the back of the cathedral. The winter sun was blindingly bright as I stepped out onto the stone steps. The air was crisp, free, and clean, burning my lungs in the best possible way. I pulled my black wool coat tighter around my shoulders, walked down the steps, and raised a hand to hail a cab. I had a meeting with the CEO of Global Freight Solutions at 4 o'clock. It was time to get back to work. That's how you rewrite a tragedy. You don't scream, you don't beg, and you don't try to prove your worth to people committed to misunderstanding you. You simply hand them the pen, walk away, and watch them write their own catastrophic ending. True power isn't about getting revenge. It's about getting entirely out of their way. If you loved this story of cold, calculated karma, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs a reminder of their worth, and subscribe for more deeply human, reborn drama stories.